Excess noise in our images is a result of using high ISO, but we can't always avoid that. Your success at dealing with noise is going to depend on your image being sharp and well exposed. It certainly shouldn't be underexposed in the shadows. Whenever I need to use a high ISO, I always expose to the right. Then defeating that noise is not a great issue. What do I mean by exposed to the right? Basically it means exposing for the shadow, squeezing as much light into the sensor as we possibly can, but without destroying the highlights. So here's the example of the image that was exposed to the right, but all of the editing has been done, global and strategic. All I've got left to do now is to address the noise. Now to fix noise, we're going to go to the Detail tab, but it's a pretty good sign that we're struggling to see any noise in an image here which was shot with 2000 ISO. What I'm going to do is to click and drag up to about 100%. You can see that down at the bottom left corner. So I can see a little bit of the bird and I can see the background. Generally it's the even tone backgrounds where we can see the noise at its worst, and that's where we tend to look when we're putting in our fix. So how much noise reduction do we put in? Well, if we push this extremely to the right, first of all it's going to take a couple of seconds, but it almost smooths out the image too much. When we do this, we can sometimes make our images look almost cartoon-like. They don't look natural. So I tend to set the noise reduction back, and I usually step it up and I take a look at the before and after. So I double click and it'll jump back. I'll go up a bit more and look again. But even when the noise reduction is applied at around 42, we can still see a little bit of noise in the background. That's usually where I stop, because that's where it looks natural, especially when we hit Ctrl 0 and fit the image on screen. This image was shot at 1600 ISO, but you can see that the conditions were quite contrasty. Quite a bit of light in the sky, but quite deep shadows, particularly bottom right. I'm going to put the global editing into this shot, and then we'll take a look at the noise. To be able to lighten the shadows in the bottom right corner, I've had to push my shadow slider to the extreme right hand side. Now the image doesn't look too bad, but let's zoom in and take a look at the noise. I'll go to the Noise tab first with the Detail section. But I'm going to click and drag down here. We're going to raise this up to about the same as the last image, just around about 100%. Now we can see something completely different. And we're going to struggle a little bit, or we're certainly going to have to work a little bit harder to deal with the noise here, as opposed to the swan a few moments ago. Now you can see when we push this slider to the right, somewhere around 35, it does a pretty good job. But when we start to look very carefully, we can see coloured pixels in the shadow areas and over on the right hand side. So it's in these situations that we may need to go deeper into the noise reduction. Because you'll notice that each of these noise reduction and colour noise reduction have other options that we can drop down. Now I'm not going to spend too much time here moving these sliders because I very rarely move these sliders, so for me this has to be a bit of trial and error, and I guess it's going to be the same for you too. Because if we get the exposure right and we don't underexpose those shadows, we don't need them. But they're there, and if we do get some colour problems, well then we can use the sliders to try to smooth them out. If I take it right down to the left, you can see clearly the coloured pixels are looking much worse, so that's not the good way to go with that slider. So I'll double click to reset that. That's the sort of thing you're going to need to do with the other options here. But get the exposure right and you won't need to. To finish this video, I pose this question. Should we spend money on specialist noise software and then much of our time learning how to use it? Or do we make sure we get the exposure and sharpness right to start with? Because when we do, noise suppression is quick and easy to deal with.